Never sign a patent agreement if your boss does this during negotiations. Picture this. You're sitting across from your CEO, holding termination papers, while he's grinning like he just won the lottery. But here's what they didn't know. I had embedded something called a phantom license clause that would become their worst nightmare. By the time I sent 48 legal notice letters in a single night, 2.9 billion worth of global systems were about to freeze. And the best part? They had no idea what was coming. My name is Thomas Mitchell, and I spent 15 years believing that hard work and innovation would be rewarded. I was wrong. But before I tell you how I brought down a corporate empire overnight, let me take you back to where it all started. In my cramped home office at 3 a.m., where I was about to create something that would change the world, the blue glow of my computer screen was the only light in the house as I fine-tuned the final algorithms of my AI logistics optimization system. My wife, Sarah, had given up asking when I'd come to bed months ago. Through the crack in my daughter Emma's door, I could see her sleeping peacefully, clutching the stuffed elephant I'd bought her for her 7th birthday. The birthday I'd missed because of another urgent deadline. This is it, I whispered to myself, watching the code compile. The system I'd been developing could optimize global supply chains with unprecedented efficiency. We're talking about reducing shipping costs by 40%, cutting delivery times in half, and eliminating waste worth billions of dollars annually. Every major logistics company in the world would want this technology. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Emma asked why Daddy only talks to his computer now. What should I tell her? The guilt hit me like a punch to the stomach, but I pushed it aside. Once this patent was filed and the licensing deals started rolling in, I'd have all the time in the world for my family. I'd make it up to them. Have you ever created something you knew could change the world? That feeling of holding the future in your hands? That's exactly what I felt as I prepared the patent application. But here's where I made a decision that would save my life, literally. My father had been a patent attorney before he passed, and he'd taught me something most inventors never learn. Always keep a failsafe. As I filled out the patent paperwork, I added what I called a phantom license clause, a legal provision buried deep in the technical specifications that would allow me to revoke all licensing agreements under specific circumstances. It was perfectly legal, but so obscure that even experienced patent lawyers might miss it. I told myself it was just insurance, never thinking I'd actually need it. The next morning, I walked into Technova Industries with a spring in my step, carrying the patent application that would make the company, and me, incredibly wealthy. David Wilson, our CEO, had always been supportive of my work. He'd personally recruited me from Google 5 years earlier, promising that Technova would be different from those corporate machines that chew up talent. That afternoon, Wilson's assistant called. Mr. Wilson would like to see you in the conference room. It's about a strategic opportunity. Something in her voice made my stomach clench, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was probably about the patent. Maybe they wanted to fast-track the filing process. The conference room felt different somehow. Wilson was there with 3 people I didn't recognize. 2 men in expensive suits and a woman with a legal pad covered in notes. The company's head of legal, Janet Martinez, sat in the corner, looking uncomfortable. "Thomas, please sit down," Wilson said, his usual warm smile noticeably absent. "I want you to meet our outside counsel. They're here to discuss your recent innovation. For the next hour, they grilled me about every aspect of my invention. Not the usual excited questions about market potential or implementation timelines, but detailed technical queries about the core algorithms, the proprietary methods, the specific processes that made it work. They wanted to know everything. Things that would only matter if they planned to replicate or modify the technology. Mr. Mitchell, one of the suits said, we need to discuss the intellectual property assignment for this project. My blood ran cold. IP assignment? This was developed on my own time, using my own resources. According to my employment contract, I retain rights to inventions created outside of company time and resources. Wilson leaned forward. Thomas, you're a valuable member of our team, but we need to protect the company's interests. This technology was developed by an employee of Technova, and we believe it falls under our IP umbrella. That night, I called my mother. At 73, she was still sharp as a tack, and she'd always been my voice of reason. Mom, I created something incredible, something that could help millions of people ship goods more efficiently, reduce waste, make the world a little better. But they want to take it from me. Honey, she said, in that tone that always made me feel like I was 8 years old again. Sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us the worst. But you're smart, like your father. You'll figure out the right thing to do. The right thing to do. The next morning, I was presented with a choice that would haunt me for months. Sign the IP assignment and remain employed with a generous bonus, or refuse and face immediate termination for insubordination. They gave me exactly 30 minutes to decide. But here's what bothered me most. My colleague Marcus Chen pulled me aside during my thinking time. Thomas, he whispered, they did the same thing to Johnson last year. He refused to sign over his blockchain security protocol, so they fired him for performance issues and then mysteriously developed a very similar system 6 months later. Johnson's still fighting it in court, but his legal bills are destroying him. Have you ever had to choose between your principles and your survival? Between what's right and what's practical? I sat in that conference room, staring at the IP assignment papers, thinking about Emma's college fund, about the mortgage payments, about Sarah's dreams of us taking a real vacation for the first time in 5 years. I signed the papers, but as I wrote my name on that document, I quietly activated the phantom license clause in my head. I had 30 days to file the patent before the assignment took full effect. 30 days to ensure that if they betrayed me, and something in Wilson's eyes told me they would, I'd have the last word. 3 weeks later, my worst fears came true. I discovered the patent had been filed not under Technova Industries, but under David Wilson's personal name. My invention, my 15 months of sleepless nights, my breakthrough that could revolutionize global commerce, was now legally owned by the man who'd looked me in the eye and promised partnership. But Wilson had made a crucial mistake. He'd filed my exact patent application, including every technical specification, every algorithm, every single line of code, including the phantom license clause he didn't know existed. I spent the next week quietly researching what Wilson had done with my technology. What I found made my blood boil. He hadn't just stolen my patent. He'd already sold licensing agreements to 48 companies worldwide. Amazon, FedEx, DHL, Walmart, Target, and 43 others had paid a combined $2.9 billion for the right to use my invention. my invention. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was planning to destroy your life behind your back? I found meeting notes on Wilson's computer that laid out their strategy. Get the patent signed over, wait 60 days, then terminate my employment for redundancy due to strategic restructuring. They'd planned my destruction from the moment I'd shown them my work. That night, I went home and hugged Emma extra tight as I tucked her into bed. "Daddy," she said, "why do you look sad all the time now?" "Daddy's just learning some important lessons about people, sweetheart. But you know what? Sometimes when bad people do bad things, good people have to fight back." "Are you going to fight back, Daddy?" I kissed her forehead. Sometimes good people have to be very, very smart about how they fight back. The next morning, I began preparing for war. I contacted an independent patent attorney, Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, who specialized in IP theft cases. When I explained the phantom license clause to her, she was quiet for a long moment. "Thomas," she finally said, "this is either brilliant or insane. If we can prove willful infringement and unauthorized commercialization, you could potentially revoke every single licensing agreement they've made. But you understand what that would mean? 48 companies have invested hundreds of millions of dollars implementing your technology. If you pull the rug out from under them, then maybe next time they'll do their due diligence before buying stolen goods," I replied. For 2 weeks, I prepared. I gathered evidence of Wilson's deception, documented the theft of my intellectual property, and compiled a list of every company that had licensed my technology. Dr. Hayes helped me prepare 48 individual cease and desist letters, each one legally bulletproof, each one capable of shutting down operations at companies worth billions of dollars. On a Tuesday morning in November, I received the email I'd been expecting. "Due to strategic restructuring requirements, your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. We appreciate your contributions to Technova Industries and wish you well in your future endeavors." They'd fired me. They'd stolen my patent. They'd sold it for $2.9 billion, and they thought they'd won. That afternoon, I cleaned out my desk while Wilson watched from his glass office, that same self-satisfied smirk on his face. As I packed my personal belongings, he actually had the audacity to walk over. "Thomas, I want you to know this wasn't personal. It's just business. The company needs to move in a different direction, and unfortunately, your skill set no longer aligns with our strategic vision." I looked up at him, this man who'd shaken my hand and called me a genius just 6 months earlier, and smiled. "David, I understand completely. You'll be hearing from me soon." Something flickered in his eyes. Confusion, maybe even a hint of concern. But he shrugged it off and walked away. If only he'd known what soon meant. That evening, I sat in my home office with my laptop, my phone, and 48 perfectly crafted legal documents. Sarah brought me coffee and kissed the top of my head. "Honey, what are you doing?" I looked up at my wife, this incredible woman who'd supported my dreams even when they kept me away from her and Emma. "I'm about to change everything. By tomorrow morning, David Wilson is going to understand that some things aren't for sale." At exactly 11:47 p.m., I began executing the phantom license revocation. One by one, I sent 48 cease and desist letters to 48 companies, each one informing them that their licensing agreement was null and void due to the unauthorized use of stolen intellectual property. Each letter was copied to their legal departments, their CEOs, and, just for good measure, the business media outlets that covered their industries. By midnight, it was done. I'd just frozen the operations of 48 companies around the world. And the best part? Wilson had no idea what was coming. The first call came at 6:23 a.m. I was making Emma breakfast when my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something told me this was exactly what I'd been waiting for. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Then another. By the time Emma finished her cereal, I had 17 missed calls, and my inbox was exploding with emails. "Daddy, your phone is really loud," Emma said, covering her ears as another call came through. "I know, sweetheart. Some very important people are trying to reach Daddy about work." I smiled and ruffled her hair. "Why don't you go get ready for school while I handle this?" As she ran upstairs, I finally answered the phone. The voice on the other end was frantic, barely controlled panic wrapped in corporate speak. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Jennifer Walsh, General Counsel for Pacific Logistics. We received your letter this morning, and I need to inform you that we have over 200 trucks currently en route using the disputed technology. If we shut down operations as your letter demands, we're looking at millions in losses and complete supply chain breakdown." "Ms. Walsh," I said calmly, stirring my coffee, "you license stolen intellectual property. The fact that you've invested heavily in implementing it doesn't change the legal reality that you never had legitimate rights to use it." "But Mr. Mitchell, surely we can—" I hung up. The phone immediately rang again. This time, it was Amazon's legal department, then FedEx, then DHL. One after another, the companies that had paid David Wilson $2.9 billion for my invention were discovering that their entire logistics operations were built on quicksand. Have you ever watched dominoes fall in slow motion? That's exactly what was happening to the global supply chain, and I was the one who'd flicked the first tile. By 8 a.m., the financial markets had caught wind of the story. Technology stocks were plummeting as investors tried to understand the scope of what was happening. The headlines were brutal. Global logistics crisis as patent dispute paralyzes supply chains. Mysterious inventor holds world's commerce hostage. 2.9b, patent scandal rocks corporate America. Emma came downstairs in her school uniform, backpack slung over her shoulder. "Daddy, why is our house on TV?" I looked at the kitchen television. Sure enough, there was a news van parked across the street, and a reporter was standing in front of our house talking about the mysterious patent genius who brought global commerce to its knees overnight. "Well, sweetie," I said, kneeling down to her level, "sometimes when grown-ups do bad things, other grown-ups have to stand up and say, that's not okay. And sometimes that makes the news." "Are you in trouble?" "No, baby. Daddy's not in trouble. But some people who thought they could steal from Daddy are learning a very important lesson about honesty." Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, her phone pressed to her ear, her face pale. "Thomas, that was my sister. She says it's all over the news. They're calling you everything from a genius to a terrorist. What exactly did you do?" Before I could answer, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID made my stomach drop. David Wilson. "Thomas." His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. "We need to talk. Now." "Good morning, David. I assume you've had a busy morning fielding calls from some very unhappy clients?" "Cut the crap, Thomas. What the hell have you done?" "I've simply exercised my legal rights as the legitimate patent holder. You see, David, when you filed my patent under your name, you made a crucial mistake. You filed every single specification exactly as I wrote it, including some very interesting clauses you apparently didn't bother to read. The silence on the other end was deafening. You're bluffing, he finally said. That patent belongs to Technova. You signed the assignment. David, I signed an assignment for intellectual property developed using company resources. But here's the beautiful thing about phantom license clauses. They allow the original inventor to retain certain rights even after assignment, particularly when the assignment was obtained through fraudulent means. Another long pause. What do you want? Justice, I said simply. And maybe you should check the news. I think the FBI is about to have some questions for you. I wasn't bluffing about the FBI. Dr. Hayes had been busy while I was sending those letters. She'd contacted the Securities and Exchange Commission about potential securities fraud, and they'd apparently found the case interesting enough to refer it to federal investigators. By noon, news vans weren't the only vehicles parked outside Wilson's office building. The sight of federal agents carrying boxes of documents out of Technova Industries was all over the business news by lunchtime. Wilson's face, looking haggard and desperate, was plastered across every financial website. The man who'd stolen my life's work was now facing potential federal charges for wire fraud, securities fraud, and theft of intellectual property. But as satisfying as it was to see Wilson getting his comeuppance, I wasn't prepared for what happened next. Emma came home from school crying. The kids at school said you're a bad man who's making their parents lose their jobs, she sobbed into my chest. Mrs. Henderson said her husband works for one of those companies, and he might get fired because of what you did. My heart broke. In my righteous anger, I'd focused on punishing Wilson and the executives who'd stolen from me. I hadn't fully considered the innocent employees who'd be caught in the crossfire. Thousands of truck drivers, warehouse workers, logistics coordinators, people just trying to make a living, were facing uncertainty because I'd pulled the plug on their company's operations. Sarah sat down beside us on the couch. Thomas, I support you. What Wilson did was wrong, and he deserves to face consequences. But Emma has a point. There are a lot of innocent people being hurt by this. That evening, Dr. Hayes called with an update that made the situation even more complex. Thomas, I've been fielding calls all day from the companies affected by your cease and desist orders. 3 of them have filed emergency injunctions, trying to force you to restore their licenses. But here's the interesting part. 5 companies have actually thanked us. Thanked us for shutting down their operations? It turns out Wilson's licensing scheme was even more corrupt than we thought. Several companies are claiming they were overcharged, that Wilson presented false performance metrics, and that they were pressured into signing agreements under duress. They want to cooperate with the federal investigation. And the other 43 companies? They're lawyering up hard. But Thomas, there's something else. The Justice Department wants to meet with you tomorrow. They're interested in your cooperation with a broader investigation into corporate IP theft. The next morning, I found myself in a federal building downtown, sitting across from 2 FBI agents and an assistant U.S. attorney. They explained that Wilson's scheme was part of a larger pattern they'd been investigating, a network of executives who systematically stole intellectual property from employees and then monetized it through shell companies and offshore accounts. Mr. Mitchell, Agent Sarah Chen said, your phantom license clause was brilliant, but it's also given us something we've never had before, the ability to unwind fraudulent IP deals in real time. We'd like your cooperation in identifying other potential victims. What would that cooperation look like? Testify before a grand jury about Wilson's methods. Help us trace the money flow. And maybe consider working with the affected companies to restore legitimate operations while we sort out the legal mess. Over the next week, the full scope of Wilson's fraud became clear. He hadn't just stolen my patent, he'd done the same thing to at least 12 other inventors over 5 years. The FBI found evidence of a systematic scheme to identify valuable employee innovations, manipulate them into signing IP assignments, and then sell the technology to the highest bidder. But the personal cost was becoming unbearable. Emma's school had to hire security because of the media attention. Sarah was afraid to leave the house because of the angry messages we were receiving from people whose jobs had been affected. And I was getting death threats from investors who'd lost money when the affected company's stock prices crashed. On Friday evening, there was a knock at our door. I opened it to find David Wilson standing on my porch, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. Sarah quickly ushered Emma upstairs, while I stepped outside to face my former boss. Thomas, please, you've made your point. The whole world knows what I did. I'm ruined. My family is ruined. The board fired me. The FBI seized my assets, and my lawyer says I'm looking at 15 years in federal prison. What more do you want? For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Wilson looked broken, defeated, nothing like the confident executive who'd stolen my life's work just weeks earlier. What I want, David, is for you to understand something. You didn't just steal my patent. You stole 15 months of my life. 15 months I could have spent with my daughter instead of working until 3 a.m., perfecting algorithms for your benefit. You stole my trust, my belief that hard work and innovation would be rewarded. You stole my family's financial security and my daughter's faith in justice. But I'm not a monster, David. I never wanted innocent people to suffer. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to cooperate fully with the federal investigation. You're going to help them identify every inventor you've stolen from, and you're going to work with me to restore legitimate licensing agreements with the companies that were acting in good faith. Wilson's eyes widened with something that might have been hope. And in return, I won't push for the maximum penalties when you're sentenced. And maybe, some of those 48 companies can get back to business without destroying the lives of their employees. It took 3 months to sort everything out. Wilson pled guilty to multiple federal charges and received a 7-year sentence, substantial, but less than the 25 years he could have faced. More importantly, he provided evidence that led to the prosecution of 6 other executives involved in similar schemes. 35 of the 48 companies that had licensed my technology were able to negotiate legitimate agreements with me directly. They paid fair market rates, still substantial, but based on actual value rather than Wilson's inflated schemes. The other 13 companies that had been part of Wilson's broader fraud network were dissolved, their assets used to compensate victims. But the real victory came 6 months later, when I was invited to testify before Congress about intellectual property theft and employee protection. Sitting in that hearing room, with C-SPAN cameras broadcasting my testimony across the country, I held up a photo of Emma. Senators, this is my daughter Emma. She's 8 years old, and she wants to be an inventor when she grows up. Just like her daddy, she says. But what kind of world are we leaving for young inventors like Emma if we allow corporations to systematically steal their innovations? What message are we sending if we tell the next generation that their ideas, their creativity, their life's work can be taken from them by executives with better lawyers and bigger bank accounts? The legislation that emerged from those hearings, the Inventor Protection Act, created new safeguards for employee intellectual property and established severe penalties for corporate IP theft. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A year after I sent those 48 letters, I was running my own company with 15 employees. We specialized in AI logistics optimization, and we were legitimate competitors to the businesses that had once stolen my technology. The difference was that my employees owned equity in the innovations they created, and our licensing agreements were transparent and fair. Emma's science fair project that year was titled How Patents Protect Ideas and Why That Matters. She interviewed me, Dr. Hayes, Agent Chen, and even got a phone call from one of the reformed company's CEOs who wanted to thank our family for helping them build a more ethical business model. "Daddy," Emma said as we set up her poster board, "do you think what you did was right?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for months. Had I been justified in freezing the operations of 48 companies? Had the ends justified the means? "Emma, sometimes good people have to make hard choices to stop bad people from hurting others. What I did affected a lot of innocent people in the short term, but it also prevented Mr. Wilson from stealing from other inventors for years to come. Sometimes, protecting the future means accepting difficult consequences in the present. Would you do it again?" I thought about all the inventors who'd contacted me after the story broke, people who'd had their ideas stolen but never had the resources or knowledge to fight back. I thought about the legislation that had passed, the corporate policies that had changed, the culture shift toward respecting intellectual property rights. "Emma, I hope I never have to do something like that again. But if someone tried to steal your ideas when you become an inventor, if someone tried to take credit for your hard work and creativity, then yes, sweetheart, Daddy would fight for you just as hard." That night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she asked me one more question. "Daddy, what's a phantom license?" I smiled and kissed her forehead. "It's like a secret superpower that protects inventors from bad guys. And someday, when you're older, Daddy will teach you how to use it too. But for now, just remember, your ideas are precious. Dream big, but dream protected." As I turned off her light and closed her door, I realized something profound. The phantom license clause hadn't just been a legal safeguard, it had been a lesson in the power of preparation, the importance of thinking several steps ahead, and the value of protecting what matters most. Wilson had stolen my patent, but he couldn't steal the knowledge, the experience, or the relationships I'd built. And in the end, that made all the difference. The last email I received about the case came 2 years later. It was from Marcus Chen, my former colleague at Technova, who'd warned me about Wilson's pattern of IP theft. "Thomas," he wrote, "I wanted you to know that I started my own company last year, specializing in blockchain security. And yes, I made sure to include phantom license clauses in all my patent applications. Thanks for showing us that sometimes the little guy can win, as long as he's smart about how he fights. The world is a better place for inventors because of what you did." I forwarded the email to Dr. Hayes, who'd become not just my attorney, but a friend and advocate for inventor rights. "One more victory," I typed. How many is that now? Who's counting? She replied. But if I had to guess, I'd say we've helped about 200 inventors protect their work using variations of your phantom license strategy. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to optimize logistics. Not bad at all.